Humans have a love-hate relationship with change. We need it for growth and variety, and yet we hate the upheaval it brings into our lives. Resilience seems to be the answer. So let's explore a new kind of conversation where we look at the turbulence of change and the resilience that enables us to not only survive it, but to truly thrive from it. I'm Paula Shaw, life transition expert, grief counseling specialist, and author. I'll be spotlighting influential people on this podcast, people who have taken the steps to change it up. So join us as we share valuable information to help you navigate the rocky waters of change. Come on, jump on in. Welcome to Change It Up Radio. Good day, everybody. I'm so glad you're here. We have some very important things to talk about today. We're going to be talking about abused children. And in my opinion, it's an absolutely heinous thing that even exists in our country, in our world. And I'm going to be talking with someone today who knows a lot about that and who's written a book to help bring this whole problem of child abuse to light. So first, I just want to welcome you all and thank you for being here. I am your host, Paula Shaw. I am the author of 3 books, Chakras, The Magnificent 7, Grief, When Will This Pain Ever End? And Saying the Right Thing When You Don't Know What to Say. We're going to be talking in this season of Change It Up Radio, and have been for the last couple of months, about grief. The theme is a season of grief. And my goal has been to try to bring you many different people who have either experienced grief and really overcome it and really done amazing things in their lives in spite of it. And also to bring you people who are out there working to help those who have been really devastated by grief. And today, our guest is someone who has been there and who is also helping. So she has a lot to teach us and a lot to talk about on this topic of abused children. But before we bring her on, I'd like to give you some statistics. And I have to tell you, I was blown away when I did the research and found these things out. But I think we have to know the breadth and the width of the problem before we can really get seriously focused on trying to help the problem. And we need to help the children. We really need to change this situation. So let me give you a few facts about child abuse. More than 600,000 children are abused in the U.S. each year. Child welfare services ensure the safety of more than 7 million children. 3.9 million received an investigation from CPS, Child Protective Services. Children in the first year of their lives, from infancy to 1 year old, are 15% of the victims. 1 in 40 infants under 1 year old are victimized every year. In 2020, an estimated 1,750 children died from abuse and neglect. The biggest numbers of those children that are suffering are boys, African American children, American Indian children, and Alaska Native children. Those are the highest rates of who's getting abused. Neglect has the highest numbers. Children who are just left without care and food and all the basics that they need. 2/3 of all the cases are sexual abuse. And most victims are abused by their parents. Evidence shows that education helps, and children's advocacy centers educate more than 2 million people each year. And here's the good news: 98% of those educated parents and people never hurt a child again. 1 in 7 children are abused in this country, and the cost of child abuse and neglect is about $592 billion a year. So that's the problem, folks. That's what we're dealing with. That's the horror story, as far as I'm concerned. The most innocent members of our society are being hurt. And what I'm really looking forward to talking about with you today is how we change that. So let me tell you a little bit about my guest today, Susie Ryan. She is an author, an educator, an Ironman athlete, and a survivor of SCAD. And I'm going to let her tell you exactly what that stands for. Susie she is a wonderful example of the kind of people out there that are trying to help this problem. And that's why she wrote her book that we'll be talking about, called Saving Summer. That book was born out of her desire to offer a bridge of hope for students, encouraging them to see themselves as victors and not victims. She was awarded Valley's Middle School Teacher of the Year. And I have to tell you, I met her a couple of months ago and was just so impressed with who she is as a human being. I couldn't wait to share her with all of you. So, without any further ado, Susie Ryan, welcome.
What a beautiful introduction, Paula. And I loved meeting and connecting because we have such like minds on sharing how to help people through grief.
We do. And Susie, I always kind of like to start at the very beginning with my guests, so my listeners and viewers understand, where did your passion come from to do what you've done?
Well, my passion came from teaching. I've been a teacher for over 20 years, but it really started back in my childhood because in my childhood, my mom had been married 6 times. And so although I love my dad and he just wasn't around much, and I had stepfathers that were abusive and they were difficult. And, when you go through this type of childhood, the key really for me has been forgiving quickly, because they've usually been abused themselves, which is really tragic, but you still suffer the consequences. So as I became a teacher, I didn't really understand all of this because I hadn't worked it all out myself. But every year as a teacher, I love that you brought out CPS, because we have to do a state mandated testing of CPS where we have to identify kids that suffer from, you talked about neglect. I love that that's the most common form, neglect. But then there's also, we try to identify students that have emotional abuse, which verbal abuse falls underneath there, physical abuse, and then of course sexual abuse. And Paula, every year, and I do it every year, I get triggered. I start sweating, having to do the training because I suffered all of them. But what is enabled me to do as I'm a teacher, because I suffered all of them, I can identify, and I think people that suffer can feel it in another person. So I can feel there's something just not right, and then the students can feel that I understand. So they will come and they will share their stories with me. They'll share their abuse. Now it gets tricky because if they share something that I have to then go and I'm a mandated reporter. So I tell them, now remember, if you share, I am mandated to report this. And I've had to do that. But I do feel that is the bridge of hope for those students. So I love that my life has been redeemed as I share my story, and then the students get the help they need.
Let me ask you a question, Susie. What kind of things are you looking for? What do you see in students who are being abused? How does that show up in the classroom and in the school?
That is such a smart question because kids hide in plain sight. They
Mm,
hide their abuse in plain sight. So you'll have someone that maybe is very capable, and my students all walk in, and I think they're A+ students. I never look at what's in their records. I don't want to know. They walk in, and I know they're phenomenal. I know they're going to just reach high. But if they're sitting in that chair and they can't focus, or if they're blurting out all the time, or if they have a defiance, just a
mm,
defiance that is unreasonable. Everyone can be defiant and not want to maybe answer, but or maybe they're so quiet, or maybe they're so loud they take over.
yes.
You identify that they're just as something you're missing.
Mhm.
And and then if they're not getting their work in, and there's so many areas of school, or they don't have any friends that they're hanging out with, or they're
Yeah.
hanging out next to your desk all the time,
Mm,
that you just and then sometimes you can just you just in their work. So I'm an English teacher and a social
mhm.
studies teacher, and in English I have such a privilege because they start sharing in our writing. The first thing I like to start off is a personal narrative, and I say, tell me something that you have to have a conflict that you overcame, something that was hard that you overcame, and they will share in their story. And then it is what one girl shared so bravely in front of the whole class, her sexual abuse story, and
Wow.
we're all just amazed. Now, I work in the Carlsbad School District, and many years ago there was a shooter on one of the campuses.
Oh, God.
Two girls got shot. They were in the second grade, and then I taught seventh grade. And by the time they got to seventh grade, no one knew who those two girls were. And that beautiful girl through a preposition book that we worked on, wrote that she was the girl that got shot, and then
Oh,
got up in front of her whole class, and then she put pictures of herself being airlifted off. Nobody knew her name. Oh, I've got goosebumps everywhere. No
mm,
one knew her name, and then she went on to write, and I told her this, but you said in your opening, you're a victor, you're not a victim. You're going to use this to help people. You got over this. Look at you. You're here. But I always knew, even though I didn't know she was a girl, something was off, because she would stay in at brunch and she said, "Can I help you, Mrs. Ryan?" And she was quiet.
mm,
I
mhm.
just could feel her pain. She went on to write poetry and get it published. She became public with that.
Yeah.
So there's just all kinds of victory when you can write about it. So that's one of the things I try to
Mhm.
bring out. And
Writing is a huge tool. Absolutely encourage my grieving clients going through difficult life transitions, to write, because it's such a great way of expressing what's going on inside
exactly.
and helping to transform it. I really love that you said that. And I want to talk a little bit more in just a moment when we come back from the break about how happy I am that CPS has the teachers actually doing this testing and training that you mentioned. Because I taught school also. I taught elementary
Oh,
school
I know that.
in the 70s, and we didn't have CPS doing that kind of intervention. If a child showed up and they were bruised and they were acting despondent, or more obvious kinds of things, we would maybe try to talk to them and, of course, report. But we didn't have the training you're talking about, and that makes me so happy to hear that that's part of what's going on in the schools now. Because you're right, the children are hiding.
Mhm.
What actually blows me away about this abuse situation is children will protect their abusive parents, because no matter how bad the parents are, the children still love them. That's still their mom or their dad. And it puts them in such a powerless, horrible position. So let's take a quick break, Susie, and then we'll come back to continue this discussion. We'll be right back.
Is living in today's fast-paced world making you feel stressed and out of balance? Are anxiety, sleeplessness, depression, lack of focus, or weight gain robbing you of your relationship and your energy? If you're ready for change, you need to call Paula Shaw. Paula helps you identify and eliminate self-sabotaging thinking and behavior. Using a wide variety of mind-body techniques, she provides her clients with the most effective processes for their specific needs. To book a session with Paula, call 858-480-9234. That's 858-480-9234.
Welcome back to Change It Up Radio. I'm your host, Paula Shaw, and here with me today is teacher and author Susie Ryan, and we are talking about child abuse and, of course, our goal of trying to eliminate child abuse. Susie, you mentioned in the first part of our show that you were an abused child. How did it affect you? What showed up for you in the classroom or at school, or even just in your social interactions with other children?
So again, it's such a great question, because I was the student who was perfect in class. I was the girl, and I teach these students now, who had her hand up, and I had to be called on. I had to be called on, and it was I needed the attention. So what happened to me is, because I wasn't getting it at home, and Paula, the hardest thing about all the abuse, I did not feel loved. Now, my parents, of course, but I did not feel loved. I did not feel loved, and so when I got to school, I needed that teacher to look at me. I needed that teacher to think I was amazing. I had this performance-based security. Now I can identify it, but back then I couldn't. I just had to work the hardest and get the best score on my math test. I had to be perfect in class. I had to have the teacher adore me, because I needed to be loved and feel like I was okay. And that is that is a prison. That is such a prison. Now, it's better than other ways to cope that I have seen, but in school, I needed to be noticed. So that served me well, because I was the track star and the honor student and joined every club I could, and it did get me through some tough times. But when I see those students, I go to them and I say, hey, because it hurts me not to be able to call on them all the time. But I say, I know you could answer every question. I said, but, I need to give the other kids attention, but come in during lunch and let's sit down and let's chat. You tell me everything you didn't get to say, because I know they just need to connect.
The attention piece is so huge, Susie. And as well as I do, some kids are content to do that through acting out, through getting in trouble, or being the smart-ass child, who does the things they're not supposed to do. And that's really sad, because I think back on all the kids who a parent-teacher conference was called, and the parents were told maybe they should put these children on meds because they were ADD and couldn't behave in the classroom. And the truth is, these kids were just doing the best they could to survive the abuse that they were experiencing at home, or some of them somewhere else, in some other arena of their life. And their parents didn't understand what was happening either. So I love that people like you now have an expanded understanding of what might actually be going on underneath all that.
Yes, you see it, and it manifests itself in such different ways, but at the core, it's the same. Notice me, love me. I'm hurting. I don't know how to navigate through this. And just one person to come alongside that child. That's all they need, is one person to feel noticed and loved, and that can bridge the gap for them.
That's so huge. That's so huge. And I feel like sometimes the teachers or other personnel in a child's life, maybe it's their extracurricular activities or their coaches, if they're not aware of the kinds of things you're talking about, then they might think this child is just dysfunctional in some way, or needing some other kind of help, when the truth is what you just said. They need one person to listen and one person to help them feel they matter and that they're important. And, you and I see all the time in adults, the ones who are trying so hard to get attention, and maybe they're getting it through illness. Maybe they're getting it through drama. Maybe they're getting it through some dysfunctional behavior or some addiction. This behavior doesn't stop with children if it isn't addressed.
It is so true. It is so true. So I had this one student that I'm thinking about, just back to the CPS. This was in the first week of school. She hovered by my desk. She needed so much attention. She was shouting out in class. She had her hand up, and I thought, oh my gosh, she's me. I love this student. I just, and so I pulled her aside and I said, no, I connect with me. And she hung out. But then I started seeing bruises, and so we had to call CPS, and she knitted me. And this was the first week and a half of school when school started. She came in and she knitted me these little hats and scarves. She was just so precious. So we had to call CPS, and then she got taken immediately because it must have been really bad at home. But I was so thankful that I had that you never know how much time you have with someone. I had just that small window to let her know she was loved. But I was mourning that I never got to know if she's okay. Because once you call CPS, you never know what happens. You never get the rest of the story. So what's so beautiful about this, and she had this bright smile and big personality. She was going somewhere. She had so much talent. So I was driving. This was about 2 weeks after she got pulled out, and I was really sad, like, oh, I hope she's okay. And I see her in a car on a random road on El Camino Real, and she's hanging out the window, waving at me with this happy, happy face. So that was my sign that keep doing the right thing. Keep just pouring into the kids, because God has it. God has these kids, but God, you can do all your part, but God has to come in, because how in the world did I see that girl on the road?
Yeah.
I just needed to know she was okay, because it was really tricky at her house.
Tell us a little bit about Child Protective Services and child advocacy centers, whatever you know about that.
Well, the thing that I know is, I guess I don't know much. I do the training and then we call, but I know but they are for the kids in the sense that they're the last line of defense. So with this girl, she was pulled out, and then immediately, because they go in and because I've called CPS before, and the students stay. So they have to identify, is this really a bad situation? Because they really, it's just like you said, kids don't want to be pulled away from their parents.
No.
So that's it has to be really bad for them to pull them out, because I've had many students that I've had to call, and they're still back in line, and they get more training. It's like you said about the training, and the parents the training, because the goal is to keep the students in with their, the kids in with their parents.
Yes.
So they take it case by case, but it is nice to have that opportunity, because because what else are you going to do? What else what are you going to do?
Absolutely. And if a child shows up in your classroom with bruises or God forbid, swelling or wounds, of course, you need a resource. You need a place to be able to call on. A few weeks back on the show, we had Jenna Mendez, who is her district's liaison for the foster children program. And boy, it really blew me away. I didn't realize the levels of loss that foster children suffer, because often they are children who get reported to Child Protective Services. They do the investigation you're talking about, and they find out this is a really abusive situation. So they pull the children out of their home, loss number one, away from their parents, loss number two, even though they're better off, and sometimes away from their school, because they have to be placed somewhere else that's not in that same area, and away from their friends. So the levels of loss that the kids have to go through are huge. And yet you can't leave them in that situation to be traumatized day after day and to be hurt.
So you just synthesized why I needed to see this girl, because when you report, I'm not omniscient. I don't know everything. I know she had bruises. I mean, we didn't have a choice, but then I felt the same thing. Oh my gosh, now she's out of her house. She's lost her friends. Is she okay? It's really, it would really be nice to know. And you know, to be able to see her smiling, that must have been, you know, where they placed her with her foster. She looked so happy. She looked happy.
Good.
So it's really so important. But, you know, back in the day when I was suffering, we didn't have that. But what's so cool about my story is, even though it was a terrible situation, I got kicked out of the house when I was 16 by my alcoholic stepfather, which sounds like the worst thing that could happen to you. And it was bad. And I'm not going to deny it. I mean, I was Miss Perfect in school. I had a math test the next day I was studying for. I had a track meet. But that was actually a gift from God, because that house was so abusive that I think God just said, she's out. I'm getting her out. Now, I had no place to stay, and there was no child protective services. But here's what happened to me that was just such a blessing. And I look back and I think that's such a miracle. My math teacher and my coach, he let me move in with his brother and sister. Can you imagine? You're a teacher. I'm a teacher. So you have an at-risk kid like I was, and it was bad. And I was kicked out in the Dairy Freeze parking lot on my after-school job.
Oh my God.
No place to go. But think of what the teacher did. So the no child protective services that were available or foster care. But then I lived with the teacher's brother and his wife 2 years until I went to college. So isn't that an amazing story? Aren't those people amazing? They never took a penny. They just did that out of the kindness of their heart. Can you imagine?
That's really a beautiful story. And what a great example of how someone's kindness like that, someone stepping up, can change a life completely. Like, you went on from there to do and be all that you have done and all that you are. And now you are paying it forward. Now you're trying to help other kids in that tough situation. It's so beautiful. So beautiful. We're going to have to take a quick break, Susie, but we'll be right back. Paula Shaw here. I'm thrilled that LifeWave phototherapy patches, which use no drugs or chemicals, have become a part of my life and my business. My family and I all use their wearable patch technology, and the results are life-changing. My parents in their 90s used the X39 patch, which activates stem cells, reverses aging, and improves the function of every area of the brain. I love X39 because I can work out with the 30-year-olds with no problem. And it's erased my fine lines and given my skin a youthful glow. LifeWave patches use a patented form of phototherapy, frequencies of light, to safely boost health and wellness at the cellular level. No drugs. To learn more, go to my website, lifewave.com/safe health. That's lifewave.com/safe health. Welcome back to Change It Up Radio. I'm your host, Paula Shaw, and with me today is Susie Ryan, author and teacher, and I have to say advocate for children, and one who's out there marching to help change child abuse. Excuse me a moment. So Susie, we've talked a little bit about what helped you. We've talked a bit about child protective services. One of the things that I was really pleased to see in my own research is that child advocacy centers educate millions of parents a year. And I love that statistic that 98% of the ones that get educated never hurt a child again. I think that is huge. And I'm not sure how that works. If Child Protective Services refer people to child advocacy centers, I'm not sure how that all links together. But I was so pleased to see that it goes beyond just taking the children out of an abusive home. They are trying to remedy the situation at its core so that families can be reunited. Have you had any experience with anything like that happening?
No, I actually have not, but I do know our school. I guess I have. What we do is we have trainings for parents, and
Oh,
so we have trainings where they come and learn how to, to make their child successful in school, and different classes they can take. The Carlsbad School District really offers a lot of opportunities for the parents, because if we can educate the parents, we can help the kids. And
yes.
so they've been really on the front lines of that. And so they're doing that. I'm sure other school districts are doing that, because I love that statistic. I heard that too. And of course, no parent wants to hurt their child. They're just suffering their own issues. So you've got to
Yes.
help them heal so they can stop the cycle.
Oh, that's so true. That is so true. And you know what we didn't talk about that I'd love you to review a little bit for our listeners? What are the kinds of child abuse like that you get tested for and that you're made aware of when you do the CPS testing?
So the first one you're looking for is neglect. And
Mhm.
neglect, you see the neglect is the most common one, and you see that. And
Mhm.
you can see if the student never has lunch money, the student never has food. I'm always hungry. That's just how my system is. And I grew up always hungry. And so I always had food in my classroom. I always
Mhm.
had food. I had food. The kids would come to me, and I would be aware if a student didn't have food all the time, and
Ah,
and make sure that there wasn't a problem there. So neglect is a big one. Or I mean, I can think of students that just came in looking neglected, if it were their
mhm.
clothes or their hygiene. And we did an intervention on one of those students and went to the house, and found a really tricky situation there.
Mm,
CPS did not take the child, but that was neglect. Neglect really is easier to find, because it's out there, just
yeah.
not taken care of. So neglect. But then there's emotional abuse,
Mhm.
verbal abuse. That ended up, I was able to identify that more in the writing, telling a story
Uh-huh.
about what's
I
going
see.
on, and
Yep.
being able to then go to the student and say, hey, what's going on here? Uh,
Mhm.
and then you have physical abuse, and that manifests itself, of course, with the bruises. When you were a teacher, you saw that too. And
Mhm.
but then what's really tragic about that is when you report that, it's always like I fell, or the child makes an excuse that they're
Right.
really hurt, uh,
Right.
which is hard. And then the last is sexual abuse,
Mhm.
and the sexual abuse was really, I found out about most of the sexual abuse from the students in their writing.
Ah,
And when they would write about it, and then I'd be reading about maybe someone's trauma overcoming not getting on the line in Disneyland in time, because they didn't have
mhm.
any, which is wonderful. And then the next essay I would read is, oh my gosh, and then I would have to, this one girl in particular was abused sexually very young,
Mhm.
at a young age. And so then I would have to go to her, and then go to the and make sure, and go to the principal and have a meeting, counselor, make sure that this had been identified and reported to her family. Do you know what
Yeah.
I mean?
Yes.
Make sure all of that. So I counted it as a privilege that they would share, that they trusted me enough
Great.
with their pain, that they would share, and know that I would help them in any way I could. And I've been thinking about the people, the students that have shared, and I've taught for so long, and I know this was the start of them knowing the truth, and the truth sets them free and be on the path to
Mhm.
healing.
Yes. Oh, that's so true. And I think a lot of people don't realize that children who are sexually abused don't always tell. And what a lot of people also don't know is that the normal, natural thinking of a child is egocentric. They think everything happens because of them and magical. And I was a child who experienced this myself. When my sexual abuse occurred, I was afraid to tell anybody because I thought I caused it, because everyone else thought he was such a wonderful guy. So there must have been something bad in me that made him do that bad thing. And I'm not the only child who's experienced that. And so then you carry the burden all alone with only your child mind to try to rationalize it. And so what you come up with is often is that it was your fault, that you're bad, that something in you is defective. And so you don't want to share that with anybody. First of all, you're afraid they won't love you. Second of all, you don't want it to be true. And somehow it feels like speaking words will make it more true. So I have such a heart for how children suffer when they've been sexually abused. And that's in a situation where there wasn't threats. Some children who have been in situations where their families are threatened if they tell, or that kind of thing goes on. Oh my God, the trauma is so much deeper and so much more difficult for the child.
So much deeper. And I can resonate because when I was sexually abused when I was 8, I never told anybody until I wrote the book. And now, of course, I know that now, of course, it's public. I could not tell for just the reasons you say. Obviously, you're a phenomenal counselor, because I felt foolish because I trusted an older boy because I knew nothing. I'm just, bebopping along, and he took advantage of me. And I didn't even understand what had happened at all. I was so confused. And then when it took me years to put together, oh my gosh. And I just felt like I'd caused it and it was my fault.
Yes.
And so I never told anybody. And in the book, the blessing is other people that have suffered, like you, like me, like these students, they're going to know they're not alone. They're not alone. Because I chronicle that. Now, the book is a novel. It's not everything that's happened to me, but it is based on part of my childhood and based on part of my students' childhoods. And I actually wrote in a boy. Here's another tragic thing that happens. One of my students who died tragically in a car accident, getting in a car with a bunch of kids. And I wrote him his mom gave me permission to write him into the book. So it's an amalgamation of all kinds of scenes and composite characters.
And tell everybody what the name of the book is, and is it available, and where is it available?
So the book is Saving Summer by Susie Ryan, and it's on Amazon. And you can, I've got my website up. Oh, aren't you guys phenomenal? I love it. Yeah, you can get it on Amazon, and the website is susyryan.com. And it is a novel, but it is part of my life. But then I fictionalized it. But I did put in the scene of my stepfather kicking me out. And I did put in the scene of the sexual abuse, because those were two of the most traumatic things that happened to me.
Yeah.
And the sexual abuse was, I started sweating when I was writing it. I felt physically ill when I was writing it. And Paul, I felt that shame again as I wrote it, and I write it as an adult that I'm being manipulated by this boy. And what happened to me, Paula? I fell in love with little Suzy.
In writing the book, you mean?
The innocence and the belief that everyone was good. And what I forgave that boy, because he must have been suffering at home and what was going on with him. And I just felt it freed me from carrying that burden of I thought being sexually abused at so young, why would anyone do that to a child? I just couldn't wrap my mind around it. And even more guilt that, again, it must have been me, but it freed me. And I loved my spunky self that refused to be beaten by that. I love in your your promo, you talk about being resilient, because it made me resilient. And it also made me understand when my students told me their struggles.
Yes. And I love that you talked about forgiveness. And another point you made that I think is so important can really pretty much be summed up in hurt people hurt people. And it's so true that very often the perpetrators, whether it's physical abuse, whether it's sexual abuse, whether it's verbal abuse, the perpetrators are almost always people who suffered that same abuse themselves and never had the opportunity to heal it. You talk about the things you were able to do to free you. And one of the things you talked about that I think is so important is forgiveness. And when I first started doing grief recovery groups, one of the concepts that we would really spend time talking about was forgiveness. And not forgiveness coming from the place of what you did is okay, not that at all. But forgiveness coming from the place of, I'm no longer going to let you imprison me in my anger and my hatred for you. Because when we can't forgive, when we're caught up in anger and hatred, that's real low vibration energy. And it takes its toll on us. And it keeps us from being able to live life fully and being able to live life happily and kind of full out, as they say. And so I think of forgiveness as the keys to the jail cell that imprisons us.
Oh, I couldn't have said it any better. My motto is forgive fast and love fiercely. And I forgive fast, I choose to forgive fast. And that doesn't mean I think it's okay. That means you're not going to imprison me with what you did with me. I'm going to allow myself to be free, just like you said. So forgive fast and love fiercely. But I also love what you said about hurt people, hurt other people. I've added to that, Paula. Free people, free other people.
Ooh, that's brilliant. I love that.
Because hurt people hurt other people, but then you're kind of left in, oh my gosh, now we're all hurt. No, yes, but free people, free other people. And you're free people. And the book freed me. The book freed me to really embrace that. Yeah, I had some hard things that happened. But again, I put my sweet Jack, who was my student who died tragically early, that freed his mom to keep his memory alive. She said in the candlelight visual, crying because her precious, gorgeous son, who's so cheerful, died young. Keep his memory alive. I was able to do that. When I was writing Saving Summer and Jack he steals the scene. He's just in one scene. That freed her to keep his memory alive. I just think we have to take our suffering and choose to redeem it and use it for good to heal and help people and free people.
Oh, it's so true. I've said this probably a zillion times to clients and to people in my own life, but I always continue to be astounded by the power of words spoken, but I'm equally astounded by the power of words unspoken. The stuff we do not talk about can haunt us and imprison us for life. But when we can talk about it, when we can bring it out to some safe person, not just anybody, but to some safe person in a way that's comfortable and safe for us, it's so powerful. It's like there is no obstacle that can't be overcome when you do that. So another huge point you've made, Susie. We're going to take a quick break and then we'll come back to finish this conversation that I just think has been so enlightening. We'll be right back.
For those looking to improve their lives, there's nobody better to turn to than Paula Shaw. Paula helps people regain successful lives by identifying and eliminating self-sabotaging behavior using a multitude of mind-body techniques to identify and resolve their core issues. Working with a wide variety of healing modalities, she provides her clients with the most effective process for their specific needs. To book a session with Paula, call 858-480-9234. That's 858-480-9234.
Welcome back to Change It Up Radio. I'm your host, Paula Shaw, and with me today is teacher and author and child advocate Susie Ryan. We have been talking today about child abuse. And as horrifying as it is that it exists, there is hope. There is hope. A lot of the things we've talked about today are hopeful things. Susie herself experienced child abuse on many different levels. And she's here today talking about her book, Saving Summer, and talking about her own work in the classroom to help identify and help abused children heal. So, Susie, we talked about Child Protective Services. We've talked about teachers like you who are trained to identify what's going on with children. If someone in this audience suspects that a child's being abused, what can you suggest that they do?
Well, I think the first thing is you need to go to a teacher. You need to go to someone that's a mandated reporter, because once they know you suspect, they can do the research and then they have to report it,
I
because
see.
it needs to be reported. And the reason it needs to be reported is this, and this is going to come to the SCAD event you talked about that I suffered. So in my training as a teacher, we also learn that kids that suffer trauma as a young kids, they
Mhm.
have unexplained heart issues, physical problems in their adult lives. So
Wow.
this is why we have to go and help these kids who are traumatized get past it. And this is what the SCAD event was for me. So I'm very healthy. I'm blessed. I have, my mom and dad gave me the best genes. I'm just healthy. I'm strong. I'm a good athlete. But I suffered SCAD, which is spontaneous coronary artery dissection. My main artery, my widowmaker's artery, the main LAD, it shredded. It shredded while I was teaching.
Oh, my.
I was in a poetry cafe and I had a heart attack because we're women. We sometimes don't think we're ever sick. And I thought I was strong. I did not know. But I ended up having to go after that's a whole nother podcast, Paula. But anyway, God healed me. And I had 3 extra long stints. But you think about, you put that back, and I'm so thankful, but put that back into the classroom. So you suspect someone, or you know someone, you have got to get to someone that's a mandated reporter. It can be a pastor, it can be a teacher, it can be a counselor, and somebody has to do a research. Someone has to advocate for that suffering kid, because if they don't get out of that situation, they have when they're adults, they have unexplained health issues.
Yes.
So we are responsible. If we suspect something, don't look the other way. Don't think, oh, that's just okay. No, in your heart, in your heart, and you've got to get to someone who can be a mandated reporter.
You know what I'm finding so fascinating about what you're saying? As I mentioned in the beginning of the show, the first book I ever wrote was on the chakras, the energy centers in the body. And one of the things that we know about those energy centers is different emotional issues affect different centers. And how interesting that these heartbreaking, traumatic experiences that you had, that others have, affects exactly that, affects the heart on a physical level.
It's
So,
actually shocking. It's not, but you understand it. When you understand it, that's why you have to help kids.
yes. Oh my God, yes. And not to mention what's going on in their poor heads, as you and I shared, all those years that we didn't dare to tell anybody about our abuse. You're trying to put it together in your own head. You're taking responsibility for something that you have no real responsibility for. You are the innocent child who is a victim. You did not cause it. There's nothing bad or defective about you. But until you talk to somebody, you don't know that for sure. And so I love that you're in this position, Susie, to get kids writing, because many of us are much braver about putting things down on paper than we are about speaking those words. And that's a powerful way of releasing, because until you do that, you've got this idea built up in your own head about what's the magnitude of what happened or whose fault it is. And that idea in the child's head is probably totally wrong, totally off, because of that magical thinking and because of that egocentric thinking. So I love that you've created this book. Now, is this book a book that someone, say, middle school or high school level could read, or is it for adults?
This is another really superior question, because I started writing it for middle school, but then it got too intense. A high schooler, it's a coming of age story
Yeah.
about suffering trauma, but it's full of hope and redemption. So high schoolers can read it, but I teach middle school now, and they're like, Mrs. Ryan, can I read your book? And I'm like, oh, I said, have your mom read it first, and then let her decide.
Yeah, good
because,
idea.
because it's probably it's too intense for middle school kids. But for high schoolers, I think that they would find it as a bridge of hope, which is what I wrote it for.
Lovely. So where can people get this book?
So Amazon, you can also get it at Barnes & Noble. I'm going to be at Barnes & Noble and Encinitas signing books this Saturday. Well, not this Saturday, the 17th, next Saturday, not tomorrow, next Saturday. And then, but it's available on Amazon. Saving Summer, Susie Ryan.
Saving Summer, Susie Ryan. So Susie, I mean, obviously you put how many years into writing this book, into this effort?
So Paula, I was so racked with pain that I, 30 years ago, started trying to journal. And it was so traumatic for me. I put it away. Then I'd get it back out. And then I'd put it away. Then I'd get it back out. I could not overcome the pain. I kept a towel next to me, a hand towel, and would cry into that. And then be like, I have no more time to cry. I got to write. So it took me almost 30 years. And now it's so freeing for me, because I am so thankful that it's all organized. And it's not completely my story, but the pain that I'm talking about was in the story, and now it's all organized and it's helping people, and that redeems it.
Well, you can't ask for anything better than that, for it to be organized and helping people. That's the goal, isn't it? All those years of work, and you've freed yourself.
Exactly.
You freed yourself from some really serious and painful emotional stuff, and given yourself this whole new way of looking at life. And so what are your hopes now, Susie? The book's out there. What are you hope for? What would you like our listeners and viewers to know before we end this conversation?
My hope is anybody that suffered, and pain is relative. Maybe you didn't suffer sexual abuse. Maybe you didn't have a crazy alcoholic stepfather. But my hope is every person that reads Saving Summer will embrace the hurt they've experienced, and they will be healed. And Paula, the people that have read it, I have my emails in the back. They have emailed me and want to connect with their pain, just like my students, because one person is all it takes to listen to the pain, and then you are on your way to healing. So that is my hope. People will be healed by reading it.
Oh, I love that. That's so beautiful. And I would add to that, one of the most important points that you've made in our talk today is talk to somebody. Don't keep your pain inside. There are a lot of people on this planet that have experienced really traumatic pain and have been able to overcome the damage and overcome the hurt because they trusted just one person. They believed enough in themselves. It has to begin with loving yourself enough to think you matter and to think you're worth saving. But once you know that, then talk to somebody, whether it's a therapist, a best friend, a family member, a teacher. Someone out there will see your pain and will be privileged and honored to listen to you expressing your story, your experience. And when you can do that, then it gets to move on. You get to go forward free of the tethers that pain had on your life. So please have the courage to do that. First, be sure that you find that safe person, someone like our Susie Ryan, who is here with us today, or a trusted therapist, or someone else in your life that you know and you trust. And then open up, let go, and get free. So thank you, Susie, for helping us with that today. Thank you for being with us. This has just been wonderful talking with you. Thank you for the work you created in Saving Summer. And thank you all for being with us. And we look forward to seeing you next week for Change It Up Radio, when we will be talking to a young woman named Dylan, who is a high school student who has experienced depression and gone through all that. And guess what? Found her way out through writing. All right. Thank you for being with us. And we'll see you next week. Thanks for joining me on Change It Up Radio. I hope you found this episode informative and entertaining. If you want to hear past shows, or you want to get information on being a guest or a sponsor of this show, go to changeitupradio.com. We all know that change is inevitable and it's necessary, but darn it, it's also tricky. My goal is to help you make the experience of change smoother and more productive. If you've benefited from this show, please subscribe to it, share it, and review it. That helps me to tune into what you really want to hear and what you really want to learn more about. Remember, you can find us on every major podcast platform and also on YouTube, Facebook, Roku, Apple TV, and Amazon Fire. We look forward to seeing you next week for Change It Up Radio.